What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am your host, Trill Bro Dude, and today I am excited to have back onto the podcast for, I don't know, sixth, seventh time. Dave, you're a regular at this point. We have Dave Early from Liberty Ballers and Clutch Point app. What's going on, Dave?
What's going on? Happy to be back. Happy to be a regular. Honored.
So we're going to talk some slop. We finally have some Sixers-related slop. I got so spoiled with slop when it came to the Sixers that with the Ben Simmons stuff and everything, Maurice spicing it up on draft night when he got here, everything. I feel like the past month or two with no Sixers slop coming out, no trade rumors, no real free agency stuff, just kind of barren on the slop front, that we were bound.
I saw Francis Parker tweeting at Newbeck, like, how come I can't get anything on a workout?
Exactly. We haven't worked anyone out for the draft. There hasn't been any free agency stuff. There hasn't been any trade stuff. But today we did have some mini slop from KOC, who in his mock draft, Kevin O'Connor listed that the Sixers have been floating Danny Green, who, as everyone knows, will not be playing next year. So it's a little bit of a difficult situation to navigate.
Targeting the All-Star break.
For a torn ACL?
That's what he said, yeah.
Wow, that's optimistic in my opinion.
That's fair.
So we'll get into this more when we go through the fake trades a little bit later. But so what's been floated out there is Danny Green and pick 23 for an upgrade. My thought on that is that they're probably trying to find a small forward that can replace Danny Green in the starting lineup. And they might be willing to include 23 and maybe some other stuff just to make the deal happen. My thought on this whole thing has been, if the Sixers are trading Danny Green, he's probably not playing next year. In my mind, he tore his ACL in the second round of the playoffs. I highly doubt he's going to play. If you look at the recent history of ACLs, it's like, guys are pretty cautious. I'll say that much. I know Danny's at the end of his career. It might be a little bit different, but it's usually a year, 9 months to a year. So I was already in my mind considering Danny not in the picture for next year. And I was thinking they were either going to just let him walk because he has a non-guaranteed contract, maybe renegotiate with him, signed him to like a veterans minimum deal or something, or they were going to do what this report is saying, which is they were going to attach stuff to him for salary matching purposes and try to get back a legit starting player or multiple rotation guys. So I think if Danny does get traded, it will probably be a situation where he's going to another team and then they're like waiving and stretching him, and they pay like $3 million for the next 3 years, $3.3 million for the next 3 years so that they can get some cap relief now, and then they don't have to pay whoever they're paying a bunch of money, basically.
Yeah, or just are willing to pay $10 million for another first-round pick.
Right. That's the thing. I mean, we saw this last year with George Hill, where he had basically the same exact thing, where it was $10 million guaranteed, and the Sixers only had $1 million guaranteed, $9 million non-guaranteed. The Sixers decided to just do the $1 million, let him walk. He ends up going and signing with the Bucks in free agency, but to my knowledge, we weren't attaching a first-round pick with George Hill. So attaching this first-round pick might spice up the offer for some teams, but I still think it's highly unrealistic that you're just going to get back something good for just Danny Green and a first-round pick. Like, in some of the trades we'll talk about later, like I included Thibault in them, and I included like legit rotation players. Like, I think you're going to have to give up Danny plus the pick plus something else for a team to even really consider it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the money was a bigger factor in the choice to let Hill go. I mean, I think I remember reading that if they had kept him, yes, he makes his $10 million, but that would have cost the team $40 total with luxury taxes, right?
Right.
Something like that. So I think the calculus here is it would be ideal if someone was willing to pay Danny, and then we could get someone in that same ballpark for $10 million back if that team really liked someone on the board on the clock at 23 on draft night. That would probably be the Sixers' first choice, even if that player wasn't rock solid, but
Yeah, and really, they can't trade the pick until the night of the draft anyway.
Right.
Like, they can't trade it until after they make the selection. So they have all the time. Like, they could come to a verbal agreement with the team maybe before the draft, which is possibly part of the reason why, to our knowledge, they're not working out guys. It's possible they're doing private workouts. That's what teams like the Pistons do. I've heard some whispers of that, but I'm not sure if there's any truth to it. Just like they might be working out guys and they don't want to tip their hat on who they really like at that position. Because like if you look at the guys that they worked out last year, they worked out like a ton of guys like Austin Reeves and Jeremiah Robinson Earl and a bunch of guys that they didn't end up drafting. They ended up drafting Springer and Bassie and Petrozev. None of them were worked out by the Sixers last year. So it's possible this is just a strategic move, and it is still possible if they don't get anything back for Danny Green that they could keep the 23rd pick, just maybe try to get a decent rotation player there and then let Danny walk, and then maybe that frees up some money to possibly get to like the mid-level exception or something. Yeah,
I wonder from a strategic element what the thinking would be there. Is it information? I was following some of the teams who have worked out a player like Baylor's Kendall Brown. He's all over the place. The Clippers have been working with or interviewing players projected to go in the first. So you wonder if they're trying to get one. They're trying to get a first-round pick.
I would imagine.
Having read The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis, who's got plenty of like slop on Daryl Morey's, thinking when it comes to the draft. Maybe he's the type of person who'd say you're actually at risk for biasing yourself based on a player's workout. So you're better off making your decision based on the game film and an interview on Zoom, but not because then all your scouts get biased. So it could be something like that combined with not sharing intel. I have no idea, but it is an interesting thing.
I mean, generally speaking, workouts are not that useful. Like from everything I've read, everything I've heard, I think Daryl Morey kind of subscribes to this ideology, which is like, unless it's like a Markelle Fultz situation where like,
I was just going to say, Ned Cohen's still here. He can tell you we should have paid attention to that.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That is something that it is alarming. And I think like, even if you look back at last year's draft, like the guy we drafted, Jaden Springer, had a lot of question marks about his jumper going into the draft. Maybe there's a situation where they got him into workouts and they still didn't like what they saw from the jumper and that they didn't think that he progressed enough from where he was in college. And they say, you know what? We're going to let another team try to develop this guy. And a bunch of teams brought him in for workouts. He ends up falling down the boards. At one point, a lottery pick ends up with us at the end of the first round, and he still has shooting question marks about his jumper, and he still has things that he needs to work on. Now, of course, I'm a sicko, so I know that he is older than like half the guys, or younger than like half the guys that are going to go in the lottery, which is good news to me because it says that he has a longer runway to kind of develop his game and maybe get to the point where he could be a rotation player. But my whole thing with workouts is like, workouts generally speaking are kind of worthless unless there's a major red flag like a shooting mechanics, or in Markel's situation it wasn't even just the shooting, it was the fact that like he was having like mental breakdowns in these workouts and like couldn't even perform in front of the scouts that were in there, which is like tells you right there like how is he going to do in front of 20,000 people. So that's a scenario, but I would say that's the outlier, right?
I mean, going into it, it really just feels like hindsight. I remember agreeing with Derek Bodner, whose point was it doesn't matter that he didn't shoot well. You shouldn't look at that stuff too much anyway. You remember Darko Milicic going second overall to Detroit because he had like a smash workout with the Pistons. He got taken over some superstars. So yeah, generally that's a warning. You do not want to pay too much attention to a dude's workout. We look back at Fultz and say, well, he didn't shoot well with Boston. He did shoot well with the Lakers. And we draw these conclusions that I feel like he's probably too much of an outlier to take many lessons from. But other than that, if you're paying the third pick that became Jason Tatum and the 14th pick that became Romeo Langford, just be certain, at least spend the weekend with the guy. And they didn't do that. So that's kind of weird.
Well, it's also funny because in retrospect, the only part of the trade that the Sixers really lost is the fact that they weren't smart enough to scout Tatum and figure out that he was going to become what he became, because the Romeo Langford pick is, the 1 year that the Kings are actually decent, they get the 14th pick in the draft. Everyone looked at that Kings pick and they were like, oh my God, like I think it was an unprotected Kings pick. And everyone looked at that like this amazing asset. And then it turns into the 14th pick. They get Romeo Langford. It turns into nothing, which is kind of funny to me. But in retrospect, like
Helped me get White.
Did it? I mean, Josh Richardson was for salary matching. Like, I don't think that the Spurs really cared about Romeo Langford. I think it was just like he's included in this trade because it makes the trade work for salary. But
right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did.
But I agree with you. We debated all year, like, would you rather this 2018 pick or would you rather it go to 2019?
Right. And it is funny that God, they had so many picks and such an insanely it's very annoying. But so on the opposite side of that, in terms of like the workouts and stuff, I just want to get this in before we move on to the next thing, which is I remember Seth Partnow from The Athletic saying that the one time he felt like a workout was really useful was in 2017 when they went into Bam Adebayo's workout, because Bam was thought to be like a mid to late first round pick. And then he got into workouts and he was showcasing a bunch of stuff that he didn't show in college. So like he was shooting better. He was better with the ball. He was better with passing. Like he was pretty much primarily a lobs and defense guy in college. So that's really the only scenarios where you can kind of get something out of these workouts anyway. So I don't read too much into the fact that they haven't been working out people, or at least they haven't been doing it publicly. But let's move on to the fake trade stuff.
And even then, like my Knicks fans friends will tell you, 2018, we heard that about Kevin Knox. He's displaying this newfound ability to be a pick and roll ball handler, and he torched Miles Bridges in practice.
There you go. Exactly. There are multiple scenarios. That's why I just don't invest all that much into this fact that they haven't worked out anyone publicly, but kind of just like shifting our attention to the draft. Once again, the Sixers can't trade their pick until after they make the selection because of the Stepien rule. They already traded the Nets their first round pick next year, so they're not allowed to trade this one until after they make the pick. But there's a handful of guys that I've already talked about, most of them, who, if we get to pick 23 and one of these four guys is on the board, I think the Sixers should just make the pick and keep the player. Because I think that most of these guys in this list, who I've discussed before,
can I guess any of your players?
Yeah, you could guess. I have four guys. You can guess the guys, and then I'll explain why I think we should keep them if they fall to us.
Okay. Should I guess now?
Yeah, you can guess.
All right. Let's go with Liddell for one.
Yeah, Liddell's on there.
Let's go with. I feel like you're not a guy who would have Kennedy Chandler as one of these names because of fit. I'm going to rule him out. Let's go with Wendell Moore.
Nope.
No. Hardy?
I do have Hardy on there, yes.
All right, so I'm like 2 for 3. What about Jovic?
I don't have Jovic. No, I've already explained. I don't want anyone who's a defensive liability on this team, because I think that we already have too many defensive liabilities and that we have enough offense that we just need guys who can survive on offense and be good defensively. And also Jovic is like he's like 18 years old still. He's super young, so.
Okay, that's informative. What about Wesley?
I have Wesley in my second tier of guys I like, but if they're there, I'm in between trading the pick and trading and keeping it and just drafting Wesley. So I'm on the fence with him. Like, once again, Doc is coach. We have to remember this. Doc Rivers is coach. You have to treat him like a literal child. He cannot be trusted to play guys, even if they're talented, even if they're good from the jump. He's not going to play them. So you have to, to me, the reason why I have Liddell, and I'll explain my other guy. So you got Hardy, you got Liddell. I'll let you guess the other two. But the reason why I have a guy like EJ Liddell on here is because EJ Liddell's 22 years old. He'll turn 23 during next season. He's a little bit older. I do think, and this is something I talked about with Will Rucker, I do think that his ceiling might be being a little bit underestimated because he's older. Like, he kind of fits the mold of older player who gets underestimated because of his age. But if you look at his production and his first few years at Ohio State, and you assume that some of the defense and the shooting and the scoring and the rebounding and the rim protection translates over to the NBA, then you can say this guy actually might have a little bit higher of a ceiling than we think, because he's just legitimately really good at basketball. And that's ultimately what it's all about. You could talk about athletic stuff all you want. People knocked Desmond Bane for that when he came into the league. He's older, 22 years old. he wasn't that athletic, all that stuff. And I'm like, do you watch him? He's an unbelievable shooter. He's a crafty ball handler, and he's really good at basketball. Like, that's what it comes down to. So he kind of fits into that mold of guy that, like, I just feel like he has a safe floor. You can plug him in. He could be an eighth man tomorrow in the NBA, as long as he's not getting cooked defensively in space. And as long as the shot can translate somewhat, I think that he'll be a pretty safe pick there, which may be a little bit higher ceiling. Jaden Hardy is the other guy that you mentioned there. Jaden is kind of in that Blake Wesley camp where, like, I don't know, but I would only draft him kind of for the same reason why the Nets drafted Cam Thomas last year, which is like, there's a shot that he just comes in and he's fucking amazing. Like, there's a sliver of a chance. Really high recruit, gets buckets, is a good shot creator, like, has flashes and moments where you could see a little bit of some, stardom upside. And that's all you really need for a guy in order to flip him in a trade if he's not going to be part of this core. So that's why I had Hardy on there. I do like him as a prospect too. Like, I think he's a possible, like, borderline lottery talent that you could get in the 20s. But so those are my two. Do you have your two other guesses?
I'm going to go with, having gained a little intel from what you're describing, I'm going to go with Eason.
Yes, I have Eason number 1.
Yeah, okay. So you got Eason, Liddell, Hardy, and you got one more that you would absolutely just snap up.
Yep.
Is it Beauchamp?
No, I have him in my second tier too, I believe. Yeah, I have him. I have Blake Wesley, Marjon Beauchamp, and Dalen Terry in my second tier of guys who I like, but there's a lot of limited parts of their game that I'm worried about. Not necessarily translating, but working on the Sixers. So the last guy, I'll just tell you who it is. It's Jalen with an E. Williams. Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. I just think, like, I talked to Chuck about him last week. Chuck kind of sold me on him. He's a potential secondary pick and roll guy, really good spot up shooter, has the tools at least defensively. Like, I think he's 21. He'll probably be 22 next year. That's generally how age works. If you're 21 now, you'll be 22 next year. But he kind of fits the mold of a plug and play wing, and we just desperately need guys who can play the 2 and the 3 and be kind of interchangeable in their role. So I have Jalen Williams in my top tier.
That's pretty impressive.
7 foot wingspan, 6'7", I believe he is. Like, I think
6 listed as.
Yeah, 6'6". Okay, like there you go. Like, I think that he has the potential to be a pretty good player from day one, and there might be even some more upside. And once it's funny because Chuck's comp was Desmond Bane in terms of, like, if he 100% reaches his potential type, he could be a Desmond Bane type, he said. But so those were my guys in the top tier: Tari Eason, Jalen Williams, EJ Liddell, Jaden Hardy. The only thing I'm worried about with Tari Eason is the fact that he has been, like, bombing these interviews and workouts. No one knows if it's intentional, like if he's trying to get to a team, like maybe he wants to go to Chicago or he wants to go to Memphis, and so he's just, like, intentionally. But to me, that's like, you're losing a lot of money. Yeah, it costs you millions of dollars to do that, so that doesn't really seem like the smartest strategy to me.
And you could wind up like Mitchell Robinson and cost yourself millions if you end up in round 2.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's guaranteed money that you're not getting. Like, that's a major difference. So there's the only thing I worry about with Tari Eason is the fact that, like, he just feels like a guy that Doc isn't gonna play. Like, he just feels like a Paul Reed. He feels like a guy who's incredibly talented, has all the physical tools, but, like, will make a ton of mistakes, and he'll need to learn and grow, and Doc is just not gonna do that. But if you are not factoring that in, he should absolutely be taken at 23 if he's still available there, because he's 100% a lottery talent. And if he's still there at 23, that would be crazy to me. What's going on, guys? I am very excited to announce that Philly Sports Trips is now the official travel partner of the You Know Ball podcast. The biggest reason why I've partnered with Philly Sports Trips is really simple. I give them my money. I have a mini vacation that involves the Sixers, Eagles, and Phillies, and I don't have to lift a finger to plan anything. I can party as light as I want or as hard as I want, and Philly Sports Trips takes care of everything that I hate. The planning, the organizing, researching where to go. And I get a 5-star hotel, non-crazy flight schedules, and tailgates that have unbelievable food and booze, and most importantly, it's a douchebag-free zone. These are just some of the many reasons that I am excited to partner with Philly Sports Trips. I can't wait to go on a Sixers trip next season, and Uniball is absolutely going on the road to at least one Eagles game. So let me know which Eagles game you would want to go to, and I would love to do a huge Uniball road trip. Out of all the cities, I'm thinking New York or Chicago, but I want to know what you guys think as well. So tweet at me at TrillBroDude, DM me, comment on the YouTube, and let me know which Eagles game you guys think we should go as a group this season. Phillies and Eagles trips are booking right now. So head over to phillysportstrips.com and let them know that Uniball sent you for two very important reasons. Not only does it help fund the podcast, but we'll have VIP events and goodies specifically just for Uniball listeners. phillysportstrips.com, premium travel for every Philly sports fan, and a proud sponsor of the Uniball podcast.
I was just going to say that based on some of the phrasing that Woj used about when they was talking about Doc's future a handful of weeks ago, how the Sixers are going to meet and they're going to see if everybody's aligned on the future. And then like the next day, the Sixers were like, we are aligned. You just wonder if maybe Doc has cashed in on his guaranteed years and this is it. And now there's going to be this different dynamic where the front office might have more of a say in certain things. I don't know. It would make sense to me if he was going to be a little bit more willing to play ball moving forward. You remember that he did eventually opt to go with Paul Reed just a couple days after there was a report from Jake Fisher that maybe his status, his tenure in Philadelphia is under question. So I wonder if there might be a more heavy-handed approach to getting Doc to do some of the more modern looks and trying these young guys, if that's what the front office or ownership would like to see more of.
Well, if the Kevin O'Connor report is true, I would say that does not align with that. But I also don't think that it's just because of Doc that they would be moving 23 and Danny Green. They have major holes on the roster and they need to fill them. And veteran guys are going to be more guaranteed than someone that you could take with the 23rd pick in the draft. Like, I don't think it's a bad strategy at all to move the pick if there's someone available that's good and available. But in terms of like Doc and the front office not seeing eye to eye on things, I don't think that I think let's say Jaden Hardy goes to 23 and we draft Jaden Hardy and Maury's like, we like this guy, we want to keep him, whatever. I don't think that Maury would be like, you have to play 19-year-old Jaden Hardy bucket getter from day one. Like no. It just like you're a contending team. Like Jaden Hardy's probably going to take 2 to 3 years to kind of figure out his game in the NBA. He's probably going to function as like a 6-man type at best in his first few years. And I think that overall, I think that your strategy either has to be draft a guy that you can trust that Doc will play, or draft or just move the pick for someone that you know that he's going to absolutely play, like a veteran or someone who's just kind of more aligned with what we're looking for. Because you can't really risk, like the window is narrowing to the point where like we can't just like take these upside gambles that we won't develop and Doc won't play at the same time. It's just a really risky strategy.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you also that I don't think Doc won't play him is going to be any sole impetus for one factor. I think every decision they make is going to be considering a lot of factors. One of them might be, this is Joel Embiid's age 29 season coming up, 28, 29. And like you said, you don't want to take all these sides. I think whoever they take, assuming that another team is not naming a name for them when they're on the clock, I do think that market value will be something they consider. And, if Matisse Thybulle is still on the roster as we enter the season and suddenly he sees a surge in value because he's shooting 37% on 2.5 3-point attempts per game, then you also consider what does a package of him, Springer, and this player look like? Do you have a guy who could come right in like a Robert Williams once was, where that he's kind of going to look pretty good in Summer League, for example, and maybe up his value a tiny bit. So I think that they'll have a million things to consider, and one of them is how this guy might have trade value come December.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Even if he doesn't play.
I also think the Thybulle thing is like, if you're going to trade Thybulle, you have to trade him now. If you're not trading, first off, you can extend him if you even want to trade him in the next season because he'll get poison pilled. His contract won't be movable next season if you extend him. And then his trade value goes down because he's not extended. So he's going to be a free agent. So if you're trading Thybulle, it has to be this offseason. There's virtually no way that you can trade Thybulle and get back good value after this year, mostly because I think people are going to catch on to the fact that this guy just doesn't improve at all. And then also on top of that, you have the factor of like he's either going to be poison pilled and not movable, where a poison pill is where when you're sending the money out, it's as much money as they're making now, but in terms for a team trying to get it, it's as much money as they'll make next year. So like if Thibault got a $10 million, a 3-year, $30 million extension, and he's getting paid $10 million a year, then a team would have to basically have a trade exception that he could fit into in order to make that work, or it's impossible to match salary basically. So
he'd also be crazy not to try to align up with that summer of 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that I personally, yeah, I mean, with the new CBA, all the cap spike coming, all that shit, like lining up with that would make a lot of sense. But like, I personally think that like from a legit, like what Matisse Thybulle is as a player, like right now is the time he just got a all second defense team. Like you can probably move him this offseason and get back positive value. But if you don't, you're kind of like, he's a Sixer. Like he will be with us for an extended period of time because Morey's not going to trade him for negative value.
Do you happen to know if they traded him to the Bulls on draft night? Can the Bulls extend him through October?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that. I have that as one of my fake trades, so we'll save it for that. Okay, so and then my last tier of guys, which is just so my concerns about Dalen Terry is that he's kind of like Thybulle in that his offensive game isn't really that expanded. He's kind of limited. He's not a great shooter. He's a good passer, but Thybulle is also a pretty good passer. And like that skill set really only matters if you're like a decent creator or like you're a shooter who can be a connective piece. I don't know how Dalen Terry's offensive game is going to translate to the next level. I know defensively he's going to be awesome. So is Marjon Beauchamp, who I have in this tier as well. But like I can't imagine a world where we're getting guys who can't shoot next year. Like they have to be able to shoot to play. Like if Springer doesn't come back with a jumper next year, he's not playing. Like that, like everyone that wants to play in the Sixers rotation next year has to have a jumper basically, which is why I think moving Thybulle would be smart because he's never going to get one because he doesn't like basketball. But but then Blake Wesley is the high upside guy that I think would be in that second tier. My last tier is just guys who I kind of like, but would trade the pick anyway, which is Kendall Brown. But like Kendall Brown is just going to be a project. Like he's a Jaden Springer. He's a guy who like has raw athletic ability, talented, can't shoot, all that stuff. Everything you could think of. Christian Braun, he's a little bit older. I've watched more of him recently, and I do like him. I think he'll be like a solid bench guy, but like he doesn't have starter upside to me, so I wouldn't take him there. And then David Roddy, who I think is incredibly talented and will be a solid NBA player, but like, I don't know. David Roddy at 23 is kind of a reach. He's projected to go at like pick 40. So like you could move back and get him if you really wanted him. But all right, so let's move on to our trades because I have a bunch of trades here that I created. The first one up is already from the jump. Sam Presti has fucked me and made it so that this trade is impossible now because JaMychal Green was traded today. But if you remove JaMychal Green from the trade, you can also remove Furkan Korkmaz. So the trade is, I'll explain it for people that are listening on the podcast. We have Will Barton and JaMychal Green going to the Sixers. So get rid of JaMychal Green. So it's basically Will Barton to the Sixers, Danny Green, Matisse Thybulle, and a first-round pick. Furkan Korkmaz was in this deal for salary matching purposes for JaMychal Green, but now that JaMychal Green's been traded to the Thunder, we're just going to do Furkan Korkmaz is gone. So it's just Danny Green. They waive and stretch him, or they just pay him not to play, which I highly doubt with Jokic in his prime. So you waive and stretch him to save money, which is why they made the JaMychal Green trade, to save some money. They salary dumped him. They got a pick, whatever. So you save some money. You get Matisse Thybulle on a rookie deal still. You can extend him. And then and then the 23rd pick, which becomes a little bit less realistic because they just got the 30th pick and they already have the 22nd pick. So this trade isn't as realistic as it was 24 hours ago when I made it. But basically, long story short, the Sixers get Will Barton, the Nuggets get Danny Green, Thybulle, and a first-round pick. So scale of 1 to 10, I would say this is a 4 now, maybe a 3. It was a 6 or a 7 a few hours ago, but would you do this trade, Dave?
Yeah, I don't mind it for the Sixers. My biggest question is not so much do I like it, because I like it. It's if I have so few bullets in the chamber, what does acquiring Barton cost me? Who else could I have gotten? So, I'd have to hear some of these other trades to really gauge how much I like this one. I'm wondering why they would do if I was them taking this deal. I guess I would like to take my 2 picks now and move up a little bit just to consolidate. Right. So maybe you maybe rope in a third team who's got, I don't know, the 17th pick or something. If you find a team that would be willing to move back a little, especially if
a team like Charlotte too. Like Charlotte has 2 firsts in the middle of the lottery and the teams. So like you could move up to maybe one of the Charlotte picks. Charlotte gets 2 end of the first round picks if you're the Nuggets.
I don't mind this at all. Yeah, let's get the Hornets on the phone. Let's see if there's something there. Let's see if somebody the Nuggets really like is available at 16 or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this was a lot more realistic when the Nuggets didn't have the 30th pick. Sam Presti has fucked me over once again. Sam Presti first off, I appreciate Sam Presti because when no one is making trades, you can guarantee that Sam Presti is on the phones trying to make a fucking trade because he did it with Al Horford and Kemba Walker during last year's playoffs, and he did it again today with JaMychal Green in a salary dump for the 30th pick and a future first from the Nuggets. So, I mean, ultimately, I don't think that I think the Nuggets are probably going to try to use that $14 million in Will Barton salary plus maybe the 2 picks that they have and then get like a legit upgrade. So like if you took those 2 picks, Will Barton, let's just hypothetically say you traded Will Barton and 2 firsts to the Sacramento Kings for Harrison Barnes or something. That would make more sense to me for the Nuggets that are in win now mode. They get a bigger wing who, I know Barnes hasn't played great defense recently, but he's a little bit more defensively focused than Will Barton, who struggled on defense this year. I liked Will Barton better on last year's version of the Sixers than this year's version of the Sixers. Because now I should say not the Ben Simmons Sixers as opposed to the James Harden Sixers, because Barton's an okay spot up shooter. He's a okay defender. He's used to having the ball a lot. He's a bit of a hooper. He kind of reminds me of Josh Richardson a little bit, where when you watch him, you're like, why the hell? Like his decision making is all over the place. Like, why the hell did you do that? So when the Sixers needed a little bit more shot creation, a little bit more on ball juice, I felt like Will Barton would have been a great trade target as they tried to get him at the last trade deadline in 2020. Whereas the 2021, 22 into 23 Sixers, I just feel like they kind of need spot up guys who are ball movers and can defend.
Yeah, I think that the knock that Daryl Morey would have on Will Barton is he's not an unconscious gunner where he loves to shoot. He's like Eric Gordon, where he'll spot up from 26 feet, no problem, and take and make that. And then, like you said, he's not a terrific defender. So you're probably overpaying a bit here for a guy who's not a big liability on either end of the floor.
And also, I will say, yeah, like he's okay at everything. Like he's a solid starter. He's probably not changing your world, but like personally for me, to go from not having anything in the Danny Green spot because Danny's gone because of the injury, and then upgrading Thibault plus a first-round pick to Will Barton, in my opinion, is a massive upgrade, but I'm also extremely low on Matisse Thibault compared to probably the majority of people in the NBA and how they think. So you might be right in terms of, like, there might be a team out there that thinks that they can kind of, like, rebuild Thibault and make him into basically the new Danny Green.
I like it for Denver because we know how badly they need perimeter defense, and we know how good Jokic is at finding his cutters.
Sure.
I mean, if you pull up like hockey assists, secondary assists, their whole team is up there because they play really pretty offense, even when they're missing their two tall shooters. So
yeah, absolutely. That is the thing. Is like I think that Jokic could make Thibault into a playable offensive player, but my whole thing with Thibault will continue to be, if it's game 7 of the finals and you're in the finals, do you want Matisse Thybulle on the court? Nope, definitely don't. I don't want a guy who's afraid to touch the ball in the playoffs to be on the court because that guy's just going to make mistakes. And I don't want to have him on the team anymore because of that. But I will say, in terms of Barton for his career, he's only averaging 3.7 threes per game. But he actually has bumped up the volume a little bit recently. He shot 5 2 years ago. or 3 years ago, 4 2 years ago, and then this year he shot 6 a game. So he's at least on a decent volume. He shot 36% on 6 threes per game. Like, I think it could be workable. He's an okay, not great shooter. I ultimately would do this deal, but I also don't think it's realistic now that the Nuggets have made their trade. But all right, let's move on to the next one, which is one that someone brought up on Twitter. I believe it was Jason Timperley brought this one up, which is basically the Sixers just say, fuck it. We're going all in on offense. We're going all in on guys who can handle the ball, guys who can shoot, guys who can pass, guys who can process the game at a high level. They are trading Danny Green, who, once again, just for salary matching purposes, probably waived and stretched by the next team that he plays on. Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, and a first-round pick for Malcolm Brogdon of the Pacers, who unfortunately can never stay healthy, but that's probably the only reason he's available in trades this offseason, because he's a good player, and when he is healthy, he can definitely help a team, especially a team like the Sixers. And the thing with Brogdon is, like, he's a point guard, but he's big enough to play the three, probably. I don't know if he's quite athletic enough and quick enough, but, like, you could probably get away with starting him, Harden, and Maxey together, and then having him run backup units with Maxey or with Harden or whatever it is. So what do you think about this trade on a realistic scale and on a would you do it scale?
Yeah, major concerns with Brogdon's health. If your medical staff felt good about it, I like it from the Sixers' vantage point. I agree with you. You're going all in on offense. I mean, he shot the ball very, very poorly last season in just 36 games. So you'd have to feel some confidence that was an anomaly of some sort, right? Career 30.
In fairness to Brogdon, he was on ball a lot, and he was shooting a ton of pull-ups. So just keep that in mind. He shot like 4 pull-up threes a game, which is not what he would be doing here. Like, he would shoot those occasionally, but you're getting Brogdon to be a catch-and-shoot guy and also to be a ball mover and to run some secondary actions, run your bench units, and just be a smart decision maker.
Yeah, I have something in my ear that's saying the Sixers wouldn't do this. I don't know why. I guess it is the risk. I guess it's probably the injury risk, and it's like,
yep.
How could you give up such a decent package? Not that it's the best package in the world, but it's one of your only packages to utilize. And
right.
Then he's out and he's hurt for the next 30 games. And basically you have to shrug and say, well, we knew this would probably happen. So that hurts.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I lean against it occurring. But if you did have some sort of medical assurances that you felt great about, it changes the calculus. I don't mind it. I do remember the lessons from just 4 years ago of the Mike D'Antoni coached Rockets with like tons of Eric Gordon, tons of James Harden. I know they had Ariza and Capella and PJ Tucker, but like if you have the ability to switch, you probably don't need a Matisse Thybulle level defender out there if you have some guys who are pretty good at it. So I don't hate these nuclear offense ideas. And you remember that team I'm talking about held the Warriors to like 98 points in 3 games of that series, like right around there. So it was pretty wild.
Amazing defensive
masterpiece.
Yeah.
And Harden is very much impacted by that series. That's why he still prefers to switch right now. That's why
also, as these playoffs have shown, depends which team you're playing against. Of course, the Warriors can kind of break any defensive scheme. They kind of make it so that they're impossible to guard, as Steph Curry has proven over and over again. But, switching in most playoff series is going to be very beneficial. I mean, the Sixers could probably get used to having guys who aren't maybe amazing defenders like Matisse Thybulle and kind of just getting to the point where they're like you said, leaning in on offense, getting passable, good defenders. And keep in mind, the Rockets, those guys, when they were in their prime, were all very good defenders. They also had Chris Paul on that team, Clint Capella protecting the rim, and then they had,
and switching out on a Curry,
right,
like 30 feet away.
Yeah. So I do just want to say, like, I don't think the Sixers would do this trade. I don't even know if the Pacers would do this trade. I think maybe a deal built around Tobias Harris might make more sense for Malcolm Brogdon. But once again, the issue that I found with every Tobias Harris trade, and why I've been telling Sixers fans that Tobias Harris won't get traded, is because if you trade him for a Malcolm Brogdon, you trade him for a guard, or you trade him for whoever, the guys that you're getting back in these trades, like, you're going to have a huge hole at 4 and you already have a huge hole at 3. So, like, it's just creating a ton of issues for your lineup composition if you're trading Tobias Harris for guys who you're getting back, you're going to get back like a Malcolm Brogdon or whatever. But right now, I would say on a realistic scale, this is probably like a 3 out of 10. I don't think this is really realistic at all.
And I also feel like another team would top the Sixers offer if they wanted Brogdon, like the Knicks or something.
Sure, exactly. And I mean, I personally look at the Brogdon contract as like, he doesn't make Tobias Harris money, but like, look, he makes $60 million over the next 3 years. And if you make $60 million over the next 3 years and you're only playing half the games, then what are we doing here? The one thing I will point out about Malcolm Brogdon, look up how many games he's played. This is interesting because keep in mind, he's the SpongeBob meme guy. Like, he's in a full body cast. He's always hurt, right? But he didn't play. He only played 36 games this year. The Pacers were tanking by the second half of the season. So even if he wanted to come back, I don't think he would have been able to. He played in 56 the year before. He played in 54 the year before that. Those were both shortened seasons when there was only like 72 games. So really, he misses 15 to 20, and then he goes 64, 48, 75. So really, he misses anywhere from 15 to 25 games in an average season, which, when you have Joel Embiid with his history and James Harden at his age and all those injuries and stuff, like, I think that they would steer away from this just from a risk standpoint. Like, I don't think that this is very realistic because of that. But let's get on to some more realistic ones.
But to your point, he's only played under 360 total career games. So if maybe he could turn a corner in terms of health.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right?
Legs, jumps in the leg, number of jumps in the leg or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, most guys usually don't get older or get healthier when they get into their 30s. So generally speaking, it's a massive risk. But I guess Eric Gordon was kind of in that same kind of mold of player that was always hurt before he got to the Rockets, and then he ended up being pretty healthy for them. So maybe it is something, I don't know. But okay. So, and by the way, Eric Gordon and no former Rockets are in any of these trades. So I don't want Daryl Morey to keep doing the things he did with the Rockets. Come up with new shit. Don't do them. Okay, so the next trade, this one's interesting because I think this is only realistic, somewhat realistic, because I don't think that the Hornets value the 2 players that they're trading us. So the 2 players in this trade are Gordon Hayward. I mentioned this like maybe a month ago on a podcast, this idea. Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington for Tobias Harris, Matisse Thybulle, and a first-round pick, which is our first-round pick this year. So the thing with this trade is I think that the Hornets undervalue PJ Washington. They tried to trade him for a first-round pick at the deadline. So that's already matching, right? We're giving you a first-round pick for PJ Washington, which is what you wanted at the deadline. Gordon Hayward doesn't want to be there anymore. The one issue with that is that Gordon Hayward doesn't want to be there because he wants more on-ball opportunities, and he definitely would not get that with the Sixers. And then the other element of this is that Gordon Hayward's hurt all the time. So his value on a trade is not going to be nearly as much as it would be if he had a cleaner bill of recent health history. So the Hornets getting Tobias, Thybulle, and a first. I don't know how they view Thybulle. I know they'd like the first because that's what they wanted for PJ Washington. And the Tobias Harris thing for Gordon Hayward is basically, hey, you take our bad contract, we'll take your bad contract, and at least Tobias is going to be a good locker room guy.
I like this for the Sixers. I think I don't like it so much for the Hornets because I would like PJ Washington a little bit more than we're presuming they do here. I would be excited to get Washington as a Sixers fan. I don't know what to do about Gordon because it's like with Brogdon, you don't know what he can do. I mean, he had one of the most horrific injuries I've ever seen. I don't know if that's for like it's one broken link destroys the chain, and that is part of why he has had so much trouble staying healthy or what. That compound fracture is so nasty. But it's a long time ago now, and if your medical team says, just like we said about Brogdon, like that this is a bet worth making, he's a much more willing shooter than Harris. And I like his ball handling. I like his catch and shoot ability. It doesn't seem like a terrible bet to me. What is it? It's Harris, Matisse, and 23.
Do you not see it on the screen right now?
Oh, I had up Basketball Reference looking at Hayward.
I was like, wait, I have this up on the screen. So yes, it is.
I've got a million files looking up how much do these guys make, what's their EPM. I see Washington is a plus, whereas Barton was a minus EPM.
Yeah, I don't really put too much into those because they're all usually based on context.
Okay.
Like Will Barton, for example, would have had a much higher EPM or BPM or one of those things if he was on the Sixers than if he was on the Nuggets, because without Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., he was put into a role of being a main shot creator alongside Jokic, and he's not built for that. Like, that's not the ideal role for Will Barton. You would preferably have him spotting up more, kind of doing the more role player type things that he succeeded at in the past, and he actually had some seasons where he was pretty high because he was functioning within the offense in that regard. And he was also better defensively.
What do you think about Washington as a potential small ball five if Joel Embiid were to see? Okay, yeah. So that's really important to me.
I think that PJ Washington to me is the next PJ Tucker. And it's not just because they're both named PJ. Like, they have a lot, like the advanced version, he's not as good defensively in terms of like shutting guys down on ball. He has elements of his game that are different. He's better with the ball in his hands. He's definitely, but like, that's the new age version of PJ Tucker, right? Like,
are you sure it's not because of their names that you're making this?
Yeah. Well, also kind of similar in stature. Like, PJ's a little bit more like a big body wing. Tucker's a little bit more short and stout, but I do think that like PJ has become an improved shooter. He's athletic. He can defend. He can play that small ball five. He can play the four. And I do think that you might be able to get away with playing him at the three sometimes. So, like, if you get a guy
here, I like.
You can get him 3 through 5. So my question to you is, let's say we take Tobias Harris and Gordon Hayward out of this, because on a realistic scale, I had a 6 out of 10 on this one. I think this one's a little bit more realistic just because of the situation that the Hornets are in. I don't think they're going to get back a ton for Gordon Hayward, and I don't think that they care that much about PJ Washington for some reason. I don't know did you catch this? What their owner said, or their GM, Mitch Kupchak? He said their core was Miles Bridges, LaMelo Ball, and Terry Rozier.
I did. He did not mention Hayward, right? Yeah.
He didn't say Hayward, and he didn't say PJ Washington, which to me, that might be a little bit telling. Now, maybe you could say PJ's a role player and whatever, but like, I still think he's one of their 4 or 5 best guys. Let's just say you take the Tobias and Hayward element out of this. How do we get PJ Washington on the Sixers is my question. Because even if you can't move on from Tobias, you're eventually going to want a power forward for the future. And PJ fits a lot of the things that go well with Harden and Maxey and Embiid. And I would you do Thibault, the first round pick? Because like, keep in mind, the Hornets do have 2 first round picks this year. They might say, we don't want another rookie. Like, we don't want that, like, whatever. But it's possible they could say, we want to package a bunch of stuff and move up and get a guy in the top 10, and we need as many picks as we can get. There's also that possibility as well. So there's Matisse Thybulle, first round pick for PJ Washington straight up. I don't know if the Hornets would do that. I don't really know how they value PJ Washington. What do you think?
Matisse and 23 for Washington?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So do they have this? They have the 13th and the 15th right now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't see them wanting 3 rookies. I would prefer to consolidate somehow if I could. So I'd be interested in 23. What can 23 and 15 get me in the lottery?
I have a question for you. What can 13 and 15 get you?
13 and 15.
That might get you. I don't know. That might get you
Griffin or something.
Right. That could get you the Portland pick, and then another team gets 13 and 15. Portland gets a veteran. They move up to 7, and then they have 7 and 23, so they can still bring in 2 young guys. They could take multiple shots. Maybe there are guys that they think that they could get, that they like, that they could get at 23, that they don't necessarily need 15. Like Tari Eason could be there at 23, and we're saying he's been mocked to them at 15 for like 3 months. So, it's a possibility is all I'm saying. Like, I'm saying there are options. Like, we're talking about draft night trades. It's possible some stuff could go down where like the Hornets want to use those 2 picks to move up. They would still value getting another young guy later in the first. And maybe they like Thibault because, they want to put defense around their guys who are honestly pretty bad on defense. Like, Bridges is a kind of an overrated defender, in my opinion. Rozier used to be a good defender, but just is not really at all anymore. He's kind of just fell off on that end of the floor. And then LaMelo's like fine, but like he's your on-ball guy. He's your engine. And maybe putting defensive guys around him isn't the worst idea in the world. And if you don't value PJ Washington, who I think they should, then it could be realistic. Now, do the Sixers do it is the other question, because the Sixers want to try to get back a starting small forward, and they would be getting back another power forward to go along with Paul Reed, Tobias Harris. So maybe you're and Paul can play center, obviously, in those small ball lineups, but like George Niang, like maybe you're getting to the point where you're just having too many power forwards and not enough 2s and 3s to really make this work.
I would play Supreme. I wouldn't worry too much about it because you don't really have any that you fully trust, right? I mean, if they're viewing Paul Reed as a 5, I'm not sure that they are. Maybe they have plans for him to play alongside Embiid more this season. But I do like what Washington brings from a two-way perspective. Niang wasn't bringing you that. Thibault wasn't bringing you that. So if, like you said, you can get some 3 out of him, some 4, and some 5, that would be a pretty valuable chip in my opinion. So I'd be willing to try to make that happen, and I would be willing to part with Thibault in 23 for sure.
If you're an NBA team and you need a power forward, go get fucking PJ Washington if he's available. Seriously.
Yeah.
He's good. Just get him. Like you will not be sad about this. Okay, so these are the 2 Tobias Harris trades I thought could maybe possibly happen. I still think they might be stretches.
Does Michael Jordan think Tobias is a hooper? That's what we need to know.
Yeah, can we connect them together? Oh, the one connection that the Hornets, they do have, and I don't want Kelly Oubre on the Sixers. I think Kelly Oubre sucks, and I don't want him anywhere near the Sixers. I know we need athletic wings, but like every time that guy leaves the team, they get better, and it's not a coincidence. Like he's a ball stop. He's everything you hate about Tobias, but he's not as good as Tobias. He's more athletic, but everything else is considerably worse. So the thing that I will say about the Hornets thing that I did find interesting was I believe Tobias Harris's dad negotiated that Kelly Oubre contract because he's his other client.
Fascinating.
So I'm like, yeah, let's get Tobias Harris's dad. They'll have the Lakers have Clutch. The Hornets have Tobias Harris's dad's agency.
And we would have Pure Sweat too. So we'd have Joel, Oubre.
I don't want Oubre though. My point is that they keep Oubre and they get Tobias.
I'm just looking for these
Tobias
like,
and Oubre.
It's basically what the Knicks strategy is. Like, let's be the CAA team, right?
Pretorial Harris contracts or clients.
Yeah, let's try that, but do it with Harris's father.
Yeah. So okay. So this trade, this next one that I have, is really only realistic in one scenario. And the scenario is that the Jazz say, we're going to move on from Rudy Gobert. We're going to put guys around Donovan Mitchell that we think can defend, we think can kind of cover up some of the weaknesses that he has, which, by the way, Rudy Gobert does a great job of, especially in the regular season. And maybe they're just getting to the point where they want to kind of do a soft reset. So this would really only work in that scenario. Maybe Mitchell asks out this offseason and they trade him. Maybe they decide to hold on and try to make one more year of Mitchell Gobert. Who knows? Depending on the trade market. But this trade is the Sixers get Bojan Bogdanovic and Jordan Clarkson. They basically say, fuck defense. We're going, like, the Celtics and the Bucks have defense. We're going to go all in on offense. And we're going to try to get Bojan Bogdanovic to be our starting 3 or 4, probably 4, with Tobias gone. Because the Jazz get Tobias Harris, Matisse Thybulle, Jaden Springer, and a first-round pick. Now, Thybulle's a really good defender. Springer's going to be a really good defender. Who knows if the shot ever comes around, if he can be like a legit NBA player. Tobias has gotten better defensively, and if you're moving on from Bojan and you want to have a guy who can complement Mitchell's skill set in terms of being like a secondary shot creator, someone who will shoot open threes and still will bring you more defensively than this older version of Bojan will bring you. And you get rid of Jordan Clarkson because you can't really play Jordan Clarkson and Donovan Mitchell together anyway. This is, once again, this is lower on my realistic scale. I think I had a 4 out of 10 on this in terms of realistic trades. But like, this was one of the 2 Tobias Harris deals I saw that maybe the Sixers would say, fuck defense, let's go all in on Joel and offense and shooters and ball handlers and all that stuff, and just move on from and then the Jazz take the opposite strategy and say, let's go all in on soft reset / defense and get rid of some of our veterans that aren't really complementary to Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, I would have, if I was looking for Tobias trades, I would have started with the teams rumored to be interested in signing him from 2019. I'm ruling out the Mavericks because now they have had time to see that he's not a very willing three-point sniper. It doesn't really fit. They've got Brunson, but the Jazz are up there, so they would be one of my first calls. Who else?
Although different front office though. Keep that in mind. Danny Ainge runs shit there now.
Yeah, so, you got to trust them a lot more now. So like, even if they were to rebuild, I think the more appropriate word that you used was retool. So I wouldn't even think they'd be bad next year if they did move one of their key pieces. So I agree, but still, you just give them a call because the ownership's the same, right?
Yeah, they still got the. Oh no, they sold their team.
Oh, all right, never mind. Just throw out everything I said.
I was like, no, they have a new owner and new front office, so it doesn't even work in that regard.
Nope, doesn't work at all.
But I mean, the teams from that time, I believe, if you remember correctly, it was the Mavs, the Jazz, the Kings, who also have a new front office.
Pacers and Nets or Knicks?
So
it was one of
the Pacers and the Knicks were the other 2 teams that I had thought here, but every time I tried to come up with a trade for them, I just hated the players the Sixers were getting back, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I don't want Julius Randle on the Sixers. I don't want – I mean, like, maybe if you throw together 3 – you could do the Porzingis swap where you send out Tobias and you get back 3 rotation players who are like Alec Burks and – I can't, like, it's just not, there's no one that like solves the issue of, because like moving Tobias is still an issue, because I said it to you pre-podcast, like if you're moving Tobias, you have to get back a good player because you have Joel Embiid and James Harden. And like, as much as Tobias drives us crazy, like he was good after we got Harden. And like, are you going to get someone who was better than he was in that time? Maybe if you want to change your identity, like this trade makes you change your identity and you're just leaning in all on one end. And maybe Tobias, you view him as a ball stopper and he clunks up the offense, and maybe just getting rid of him because he's not the greatest defender. Like, it's addition by subtraction. But like, once again, you're going to have to give up stuff, the few things that we have left, and you're not going to get a good player back. So that's why like this trade might even be a stretch.
Yeah, I don't imagine the Jazz would want to do it. I do like it from the Sixers standpoint, just getting those 2 guys will jack up a lot of threes. Clarkson has some questions about if he's good at that anymore, but he's shot like 37% from 3 since the bubble, I think, right?
I mean, Clarkson's not particularly good, but he's a 6 man. You need a third guard. You need a shot creator off the bench. Like, can he basically be the better version of what Shake Milton does? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, and then Bojan's your starting 4. You still have to figure out a starting 3, but you shed some salary in this trade, so you know that's another reason why the Jazz probably wouldn't do this. They're taking on $11 million more in salary, but you shed some salary in this trade, and then maybe that opens up the MLE, and you can try to find a small forward. But then again, not a great forward free agency class, so there's an issue that is created there as well. So there's no easy solution to the Tobias Harris thing.
You'd have to be a little nervous that if they did this, it's because Ainge found out that Matisse and Springer are really good and like figure them out.
Okay, I will say though, Ainge is completely washed when it comes to scouting. Though the last good pick he had was Robert Williams, and every pick since then has been
Grant.
Oh yeah, he did have Grant. He did have Grant, but he also had 4 first-round picks in that draft, I think. Yeah. So like, you're gonna hit on one of them. Or he had 2. No, he had 2 early seconds, and he had
Carson Edwards out of Sixers.
Yes, exactly. And then he had 2 picks, which like, you're gonna hit on some, you're gonna miss on some. Pritchard was a fine pick, but like Neesmith was a terrible pick. Carson Edwards was not a good pick. Like, all things considered, Romeo Langford was not a good pick. All things considered, his recent drafts have not been good. Where he really made his money and his bread and butter was that 2016 to 2000. You could include Grant and say 2019, but I would say 2016 to 2018 where he really killed it. And since then has been not particularly good. But all right, let's move on to the next one.
I'm still hurting that the Sixers took Landry Shamet over Rob Williams.
Yeah, I know. I wanted Time Lord on the night of the draft too, because I remember saying my strategy has always been, take the guy who falls.
Mm-hmm.
And they're almost always good, it feels like. Robert Williams, Tyrese Maxey, like Desmond Bane, like the guys that are projected to go a little higher and then they end up falling further into the draft. As long as it's not like severe, like a Kevin Porter Jr. situation where like you're like, I'm kind of worried about like if this guy is going to be able to stay on the team. That's a different situation.
That is.
But like Robert Williams was just like a kid in college and was like goofy and like was like that's why he fell and had injury concerns. But
they should have taken him 100%. I would have taken Brandon Clark over Matisse and Grant Williams at the time. So
yeah, Grant and Clark were the 2 that everyone wanted over Thibault.
Right.
For the Sixers. And those 2 have turned out to be pretty good. But I actually talked about this, I'm fine with, even though I hate Thibault, I'm fine with the Thibault pick in retrospect because if you look at like after that, it's like a bunch of guys like Brandon Clark and Grant Williams are the exception in terms of like, we knew they were good at the time. They would have been good picks. Like we should have just taken them. Right?
Grant would have smashed for the Sixers.
100%. The other guys that were taken that were successes after that were like Lou Dort was undrafted. It was a pretty bad draft.
Claxton they could use.
Claxton, Keldon Johnson, but like
Cody
those
Martin.
guys aren't developing on the Sixers. Is my whole point here. Is that like Keldon Johnson's good because he went to the Spurs. He would not have been good if he got drafted by the Sixers. Like that's just kind of 2 different development situations. And so that's kind of my whole thing with like, I'm fine with the Thibault pick because he hasn't developed because the Sixers don't fucking develop guys. They just need to start investing in that.
Shout out Maxey.
Yeah. Well, Maxey developed himself. Seriously. The Sixers have done nothing for him. Yeah. All right. So, okay. We have this trade is once again, I don't know how realistic this trade. I think this trade's actually a little bit more realistic than I'm going to give this in terms of like compared to the other trades we've done. I think this is one of the more realistic ones. I'm going to give this one like a 7 out of 10 on the realistic scale. The other Bogdan Bogdanovic for Danny Green. Once again, wave and stretch. Probably you're probably not keeping him. Furkan Korkmaz. Matisse Thybulle, this is all just to make the money work to get up to that $18 million that Bogdanovic makes, and the 23rd pick in the draft. This is because from what I've heard, every time that a team calls the Hawks and they ask them for a certain player, they're pushing them towards Bogdanovic and Herter. Those are like the 2 guys that they might be okay with moving because they don't think that they can play with Trae Young. Is what I think. I think that they're going to move John Collins, and I wouldn't be surprised if they move Bogdanovic this offseason. I don't know if like the Hawks would love this deal, but like Thybulle is certainly going to give them defense. I don't know what Korkmaz does for them. I don't even know if they would be interested in moving or getting Korkmaz, but he just makes the money work. And then 23, they have a mid-teens pick again. The thing about the Hawks is that the Hawks draft really fucking well. Like, they might be the most underrated draft team in the NBA. I thought about it, and I can't think of the last time that the Hawks missed on a pick. Like, the Luka Trae thing is one thing, but, like, Cam Reddish was the only one I could really think of as like considered like a miss. And like, once again, you're putting defense around him with Thibault, around Trae Young with Thibault. You have a 23rd pick. Maybe you can move up in the draft to get a guy you really like, or maybe you can just take 2 shots at guys later. I just feel like the Hawks are going to make a lot of moves this summer, and I feel like maybe you could try to work with Bogdanović, and if he's not your 6th man, then you could get him to be like your starting small forward and lean on offense once again.
I'm still trying to digest if they're a good drafting team or the best drafting team.
I don't say they're the best, but like, because the Luka Trae thing is like, you just take Luka. Like everyone knew at the time. Like Trae was a big question mark coming out of college. Like a lot of people did not like that was a major risk that paid off. But like
I had him like 12th on my board. I was terrible.
Most people did though. Most people had him in the 6 to 12 range. No one had him top 5 generally speaking, and everyone had Luka like 1. Like everyone loved Luka. So
they're gonna acquire Ayton. It sounds like today. Like they're really interested.
Possible. That's
possible.
I think they would move John Collins in that situation or Clint Capella to make that work.
Who goes to the Suns in that scenario?
I think for money wise, you'd have to ask Brian Toporek because he's the one who said the Ayton thing is going to be weird money wise because in a sign and trade for him, you can only send out like a certain amount of money and get back a certain amount of money. It's complicated. It's not like a 1-for-1 salary match. Like basically,
but Capella is the obvious thing you would want if you were Phoenix, right?
Capella, I think you would have to move like Capella and then try to get like an asset, like either move your 1st round pick with Capella and get Ayton. Or like I think that the DeAndre Ayton thing, and I talked about this on Twitter earlier, is like I think this is going to be the first time we ever have a bidding war for a player in a sign and trade. Because there's going to be Portland, Atlanta, like a lot of teams are going to be interested in Ayton. Pistons, like, and Phoenix can threaten to match it if they sign him. So teams are going to say, all right, well then we'll do a sign and trade because if you do a sign and trade, you can't match. Like it's the alternative to it. So I think a bunch of teams are going to be like, all right, we'll give you this. We'll give you that. Like I could see Portland moving the 7th pick for Ayton. I could see my thought was, and I don't know if this works salary wise because the Ayton thing's a little bit weird, but maybe Phoenix could go, we'll give you Cam Johnson, DeAndre Ayton, and you give us John Collins and Clint Capella.
Yeah, maybe more so than
because then you get 2 starters, and like Collins is pretty good and like would be a great fit with Booker. And I mean, the shooting isn't fantastic there. You'd lose Cam Johnson shooting. You'd really only have Mikal Bridges and Devin Booker as like the off-ball shoot. Yeah, I mean, Capella's already played with Chris Paul.
Yeah, well, would you be interested in Herter or Okongwu? Because if you're getting Ayton, maybe you want to capitalize on Okongwu's value as well.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Here's the thing. Okongwu, we don't really know what he is now. I think he's going to be like a solid starting center. I think he'll be like a decent guy. And like that's another guy that like maybe if you want to point to like their recent drafts, like I don't think he's going to be the 6th best player from that draft. And he went 6 overall.
Because if I was Atlanta, I would rather get something else. I would rather target something else separately for Collins.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Ben Simmons.
Yeah, something like that. Like, yeah. It's possible that they move him elsewhere, and it's possible that Phoenix just wants to take on less salary getting back too. So the Capella for Ayton thing might actually work for them if Atlanta can make other moves. But yeah, so once again, that's another reason why a trade like this might be able to work because they're taking on so much less salary to make this work because you're taking on $4 million from Thibault, $5 million from Korkmaz. So there's $9 million. But then if you waive and stretch Danny, you're only taking $3 million on. So you have $12 million versus $18 million. So that saves you $6 million plus you get a 1st round pick. So Bogdanović doesn't even start for them. He's their 6th man. So like, they have guys who can replace him potentially too. Like Hunter starts, they have Herter. Like they don't need Bogdanović is my point. And like it's possible that this could be like kind of like a cost saving move. and also make other trades work where you can get like a $6 million trade exception or whatever it is. So.
And like you said, if you think they're a good drafting team, imagine how much fun they have drafting.
Exactly.
So they might just enjoy doing that. I like it. I like Bogdanovic, and I could see why he'd be disposable to them. I'm also just noticing right now that Kevin Knox could be a free agent. So if you,
oh hell yeah,
bring
him in.
I think I might have been higher than Trey on draft night. So let's get him to Philly.
Yeah, we need that. We need that superstar wing we've been looking for forever. Kevin Knox, baby, get him on. He was just traded for Cam Reddish, who's also a superstar wing. I've been
yes.
So that's another guy that everyone keeps floating out as a possibility in a Sixers trade. And I'm like, I just don't want a guy who thinks he's a superstar.
I saw Chris Persianen pushing back against you, your Reddish hate.
My thing with Reddish is like, I like the trade for the Knicks. It makes sense for the Knicks. Does it make any sense for the Sixers? Just no. Cam Reddish coming here and thinking that he's the ball don't stop superstar, then no, that doesn't work for the Sixers. Like, they need guys who are going to buy into their roles. They need guys who are going to come here and play off of Maxey and off of Harden and off of Embiid. No one who's like, that's why getting rid of Tobias Harris might be a good move, all things considered. So, all right. But at least Tobias is like a great locker room guy, and we can all say nice things about him for another year before we trade him as an expiring.
Yeah, Kyle Neubeck just wrote a post about him, what to do with him. And he said, like, the other thing that's hard to quantify is the value he brings a franchise off the court and stuff like that. Leadership.
I'm not even joking. I actually do think that's actually important, because I think that, like, you don't want Tobias Harris to be your locker room leader, but like, who's the locker room leader right now? Like, Joel is kind of finicky. Like, his persona, like, Maxey's 21. Harden has never been that guy. So, like, having a presence like Tobias and having presences like Danny Green, if we end up bringing him back on a smaller deal or whatever, like, I do think those things are kind of important. Like, yeah. I don't think they're the end all be all, but I think like guys kind of have to get along, and they have to have someone who like kind of rallies them together. And like,
you need a connecting guy. I agree. And I think it is underrated. Harden, people do not feel is the best leader and teammate. It's probably underrated that Joel might be a bit difficult, or maybe we'll learn that over time, because there are these similar themes with like, well, we want this player to be more aggressive, and then this player, and now this player is not being more aggressive. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree. All right, so next trade we have here, which is, I'm not sure about this trade because I think the Sixers would say no to this one. So on the last one, most of these, the other team says no. I think the Sixers would actually say no to this one, but I've been having a difficult time. These are draft night trades, so it's hard to come up with trades that are, like, for example, Derek Jones Jr. is on the Bulls, and he would be a great fit for the Sixers as like a bench wing, or like maybe the starting three. You could possibly get away with that. I don't know, but he's a free agent, so he can't be traded until like a week after the draft. You can sign and trade him, right? So the Bulls have interest in Thibault. The Sixers have the 23rd pick. The Bulls have the 18th pick. So this trade is the Sixers get Kobe White and Javonte Green and the 18th pick. The Bulls get Furkan Korkmaz, who is literally Larry Bird against the Bulls. So maybe they think he's amazing. Thibault, who they apparently are interested in 23. Now, the reason I think the Sixers say no to this is because Thibault, as much as he drives me crazy, did start for the team a lot last year. I don't think that they're going to care that much about moving up. The difference between the 18th pick and the 23rd pick, and you already have enough guards, and then you're going to have to pay Kobe White. So, like, really, what does that do for you? But this was the only one I could make work with the Bulls, unless you remove the 23rd pick and you just get 18, and then they're really high on Thibault, and they also want Furkan because he kills them. Like, that's the only scenario where I could think that this trade would work for the Sixers, and I don't think that's realistic if we're removing the 23rd pick and we're getting the 18th pick.
The dirty little secret about Korkmaz is that he's a shooter who can't shoot, and I think the Bulls would probably sniff it out once they started doing their homework.
Yep.
White, like you said, probably not a target of theirs because they'd have to pay him maybe a little bit more on ball than they're looking for anyway, if you're asking him to be a wing, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have Kobe White as your sixth man.
Yeah.
Kobe White's your sixth man, and then are you starting Javonte Green? Yeah. I mean, like, I think the Sixers need guys like Javonte Green who are like hyper athletic and like can like be energy guys off the bench, but you can't start him. Like then you don't have a starting three. You have two bench guys, and then maybe at 18 there's a starting three that you like. Maybe Jalen Williams is there or something. But like once again, they're probably not starting a rookie.
I think something that would involve White and Green and Thibault is like in the ballpark here. I don't know if we've exactly got it, but I would guess that they've discussed something like this already.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that maybe this trade would make more sense if Kobe White went to a different team and the Sixers got back a different play. Like the PJ Washington thing where like the first round picks are going to the Hornets and then PJ Washington gets traded to the Sixers. But the issue with that is like if I'm the Bulls, I'm like, well, why don't I just get PJ Washington? Why am I? He's better than Matisse Thybulle.
That's fair. When we talk about Washington, I'm like, oh man, he ticks so many boxes for the Sixers. And when we talk about White, I'm like, I'm gonna pick up the phone and see where he reroute.
He's a shooter. Like, I mean, like, that's kind of what he is. He's like he's not a good enough guy to be on ball, but he's just like a shooter who like he's 6'5", but he's kind of too small to play forward. Like he's a point guard and shooting guard. Like he's a weird fit. He's still young. Like I still think that like he could be like in a rotation, and on a good team, but like I have a hard time seeing like the Sixers being the team that he goes for. All right, let's move on from this one. All right, so this is one that Mike O'Connor from the Ricky brought up. And I actually, literally not even joking, a week ago, said into a group DM, hey, could we get Duncan Robinson? Because Duncan Robinson's value is at an all-time low right now. And I still think that Duncan Robinson can be on a good team. I don't know how in the playoffs it's going to work because you saw in that Boston series, he struggled defensively. He didn't even play in the Sixers series, really. But as a shooter, he's basically the closest thing that we could get to like a 6'7" JJ Redick. And the Sixers, you know, as good as they are offensively, I do feel like they have a lot of good spot-up shooters. They now have good pull-up shooters. They don't have a single movement shooter except for maybe Isaiah Joe, who doesn't play. So in Robinson, you get a starting three. You can put him at small forward. You can have him run off pin downs. You can have him do dribble handoff actions with Joel. He does that with Bam. It opens up a lot of things for the offense. It definitely makes your defense worse because that's kind of just what the scenario is here. But it's certainly interesting. So the Sixers get Duncan Robinson. The Heat get Danny Green, probably wave and stretch, Furkan Korkmaz, and a second-round pick. But this is basically just to get off of the Duncan Robinson contract because Duncan Robinson makes like $60 million, almost $60 million, like 50-something million dollars over the next 3 years. So what do you think about this one? Because it's certainly interesting to me.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear what Daryl Morey thought of it. You know, is he getting flashbacks of Ryan Anderson, who was not a terrific playoff player for Houston? Would he feel a certain way having seen the way the playoffs shook out and seeing that, well, he wasn't a viable option that Eric Spoelstra felt comfortable deploying very much against elite competition? However, as such a tall shooter who doesn't simply spot up, he could change the entire complexion of your offense. He could really open up things offensively, which makes the game more fun for everybody, which might make the fit between James Harden and Joel Embiid, which, let's face it, that's like the end all be all to your team right now. You need James Harden and Joel to both be healthy, and you need them to be happy, and you need them to like it here. And Duncan Robinson ticks a lot of those boxes. The defense will be tough. I don't know what they would plan on doing there. I'm not sure what type of lineups. I'm not sure if it makes sense to have a guy who makes that much money play a finite number of playoff minutes, knowing that he might not play a certain amount. But it's
or in a certain series. Idea. In a certain series too. Like there might just be a series where you're like, shit, we can't play Duncan Robinson. Like as much as Tobias Harris drives you crazy sometimes, I don't think there are many teams that can play Tobias Harris off the court.
No, that's fair.
And I do think there are some teams that can play Duncan Robinson off the court. And Boston being possibly one of them is a major concern because you're going to need to go through possibly Boston, Milwaukee, those kind of teams that are going to figure out ways to target you, on the other end of the court. So let's look at, Max Strus obviously replaced Duncan Robinson. He's a better defender. I think he's kind of in a similar mold of player to him. He makes much less money. So Miami is going to try to move on from Duncan Robinson. So Duncan Robinson shot, and keep in mind, when you talk about the offense thing to me, the pick and roll with Joel Embiid and James Harden is going to be essential to our offense moving forward. Now, imagine having Duncan Robinson, Tyrese Maxey, and Tobias Harris, who are all above 40% catch and shoot guys from three, as the spacers around that pick and roll. Does that sound good?
Yes, it does sound good.
I mean, that sounds pretty amazing to me, personally.
I think you're getting a better shooter than Danny Green was.
A more dynamic shooter than Danny Green.
And it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that you'd be getting a better defender than Danny Green would have been next playoffs.
I mean, honestly, I think that you're going to make that sacrifice on one end of the court somehow. Just to put it in perspective, he did struggle from three this year. He only shot 36% on catch and shoots on over 6 a game, which for his career, he's way higher. He shot 46% 2 years ago on almost 7 catch and shoot threes a game, which is fucking bonkers.
And then the bubble where he was.
Yeah. And then in 2021, he shot on 6.4 attempts per game, 41%. So he's shooting about 40% for his career on very high volume on these catch and shoot threes. And I think that could be essential for opening shit up for the Sixers offense. And the thing about this trade is if it's pure salary dump and the Heat just want to get off the Duncan Robinson contract, which who knows, maybe they say, no, we're only getting value back for him, or we don't want to do this. Then you
just don't want to work with you, Philly.
Right, exactly. Maybe why are we helping the Sixers? Like, potentially. For sure. But if that is the case, if it isn't the case and they're saying we just want to get off the deal, then you go, okay, we just added potentially a starting small forward. We can keep Matisse Thybulle to come off the bench and play defense, which would make me want to throw up, but everyone else would be happy with that. And then you still have the 23rd pick of the draft and you got some stuff to work with. So like you can really round out the rotation with this trade. So on a realistic scale, I'd probably put this about 5 to 10, but I would absolutely do it. I'll say that much.
I like it too, and it didn't cost me the 23rd pick. I would just add that I would be more scared of Doc Rivers overplaying a guy who was unplayable than I would be that he's going to underuse a young guy picked at 23. So I would be a little nervous that like he would just say, you know what, Duncan's playing regardless. Me and you would be like,
oh, damn, that's a good point. Yeah, you can't give Doc guys like this, like Spo and Udoka and those guys. They have the balls to bench dudes. Doc just won't
they
do
instantly reassess, and Doc is going to determine his playoff rotation in September.
Yep. Oh God, it's so annoying. But all right. So
can I just ask you why are they keeping Doc? What's your explain this to a 5-year-old in 10 seconds or less?
Money. All right, okay. Let's move on.
Go ahead.
It's the only reason. Let's be honest.
All right.
I do think it's the only reason.
But their net worth is like so many billions of dollars. No one can shell out
they're fucking. I don't want to talk about billionaires. I have some opinions that should not be said on the air. All right, so we have the Thunder. By the way, they just traded this pick. So this is another trade that Sam Presti has made worthless to me. But the Sixers get Kenrich Williams and the 30th pick. Well, now it's not the 30th pick, but the Thunder still do have the 34th pick, which is a second-round pick. So it could be Kenrich Williams and the 34th pick for Isaiah Joe and the 23rd pick. So Isaiah Joe has not gotten a chance with the Sixers. I don't think he probably ever will because we have Doc as coach, and I just don't know how he fits on this team. Unless he can get good enough to the point where he's the third guard and he can play with Maxey and Harden, I do have a tough time seeing Isaiah Joe's future with the Sixers, unfortunately. So you trade 23, you move back 13 spots, or you move back 11 spots, and you get Kendrick Williams, who's a good rotation player. Now, I actually thought that this was realistic when I came up with it. I talked to my guys from the Saturday Slam and Jam, and they basically said it doesn't sound like the reason why Kendrick Williams wasn't included in the Nuggets deal today was because he really likes OKC, and OKC tends to treat those guys really well. And they, generally speaking, don't trade guys that really like it in OKC. So unless they ask them to trade them, basically. So it's possible they're like Kendrick Williams is only acquirable for like if we just offered 23. So like if it's Isaiah Joe and 23 just for making it work, and then we get Kendrick Williams. But like Presti just traded 30. Maybe he doesn't even care about the end of the first in this draft, and he just cares about picking at 2 and 12. So probably not realistic, but I would like to figure out a way to get Kendrick Williams to be like our 7th man.
So they would be moving up from 34 to 23, parting with Williams and getting Joe, basically.
Yeah.
Would they use – I guess it depends for me if what else I could get for Kendrick, because maybe Miami has a better offer, for example.
Right. Yeah, I mean – there's probably a lot of teams out there. They tried to get a first-round pick at the deadline for him, and they couldn't.
Yeah, but he's a good player.
I don't think I would trade a first-round pick for a guy you're not starting, though. Like, he's good, but he's not starter good. Like, he's once again, 7th, 8th, 9th man. Be amazing if we could get him to come off the bench and do that. He doesn't shoot enough to play with the starters, really. He would certainly help the defense and rebounding problems, but I think that it might create some other problems offensively. I'm not really sure. I would like to get Kendrick Williams, but I don't know if they're like, I'm not giving up a ton of value for a guy like him unless they think that he can maybe start at the 3 and play some 4 when Tobias is out. Like I don't really see that trade.
Like if you heard it happen, you'd think, okay, well maybe Darryl thinks there's some like 2017 PJ Tucker potential here.
Right.
This is a guy who's wildly underutilized in our system, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, Taurean Prince is Francis from Twitter. One of the guys that he's been talking about is Taurean Prince, who's someone who I actually went back and I found some old tweets. I've had my eye on Taurean Prince for a little bit. I don't think he's particularly good, but I do think that he can shoot. He's very good at shooting corner threes. He's like 44 to 50% on those shots. He's a big wing. We have seen how important those are in the playoffs. He's not great defensively, but he's not going to absolutely die defensively. And he might be available as a free agent this offseason for the BAE, which is like $3 to $4 million for the biannual exception. And maybe that's a guy that they could see. And like Francis has been talking about him as like maybe a mid-career PJ Tucker type guy where like you find him, he plugs in well, you can start him sometimes, you can bring him off the bench, whatever. So Taurean Prince might be a better target than Kendrick Williams here for that. And also, do you remember the famous clip from
rebounding?
He could teach the team how to rebound, as we pointed out on Twitter.
I knew you were going 2 ways with it. It was either the rebounding quote or it was Kevin O'Connor saying like he would complete the championship for them.
For who? For the Hawks or the Nets?
For the Sixers. He was like Taurean Prince would be like the perfect get you over the top 5th starter for this Sixers team. I forget if it was like 2019.
2019, yeah.
When we had Butler for Tobias, maybe.
I mean, he's not that good. Once again, he'd probably be like a 7th man. Like he's been fine for Minnesota in that role, but yeah, Kevin O'Connor might have been a little bit of hyperbole. He was really good for like 1 season, but also he was on a bad team. Like you can never really tell with those guys. Also, just want to throw in a little caveat here. The one thing about these, if they get a 2nd round pick, so if they were to move from like 23 to like 34, they would have to have cap space or use part of the MLE to sign those guys. So I would prefer not to do that. I would prefer just to get the 1st round guaranteed. It doesn't hurt your cap space. It doesn't hurt your MLE. You can just sign those guys. You get a rookie exception. I would rather keep the 1st round pick if they're going to get one of these guys and use it there than have to dip into the MLE or the BAE or whatever it is.
What did you make of Keith Pompey saying maybe stashing this pick is the way to go?
What does that even mean?
So he said it was something they've done in the past. They did it
with who?
I don't. Well,
Saric?
Yeah, I think he meant like historically, and then you could look at this
Well,
admin and say Petrosov.
During the process, like 7, 8, 9 years ago, like
Hinkie did it, Colangelo did it, and now Morey's done it. So if Harden opts in, that opens
it's
up.
the
I don't know
dumbest
what.
thing I've ever heard in my life. It's never gonna happen. If they stash a guy with this pick, you might as well just say fuck it and trade Joel Embiid and James Harden. Because one of your only assets you need players.
we
You need
just
guys on the team.
we just got your quote teaser for this pod.
It's unbelievable, dude. I mean, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. And if
they
that's
stash
reporting,
23, you might as well trade Joe.
I mean, okay, you have like 4 assets. That's the problem. And 23 isn't a great asset, but it is an asset. And if you just punt on that asset, you're not going all in. You're just, it's not even a half measure would be using 23 on like a not great prospect, but a guy who you could think you can play right away. Or a half measure would be like trading it for like Kendrick Williams, who like is probably like a 7th man ultimately. Stashing a guy is literally just throwing it away. Like,
what if Bo Cruz
sense.
says, I need to spend 1 more year in Spain with Lucia?
All right, that's the exception. All right, Bo Cruz. I tweeted it when I watched the movie. The Sixers win the Hawks series with Bo Cruz. All right. Okay. So, oh yeah, and then Seamus also tweeted that, and then someone tried to say he stole my tweet, but Seamus didn't steal my tweet. It's just a common thing we all fucking tweet. All right. So we have Furkan Korkmaz, Thibault, and a first-round pick to the Suns for Jay Crowder. This is a scenario where maybe if the Suns get back a starting 4, like John Collins in the Ayton trade, maybe if they want to extend Cam Johnson and they want to start him at the 4 next year instead, that they're just trying to get more rotational guys. They seem to like former Sixers a lot. Dario Saric, Monty Williams, Landry Shamet. Like, you want to take Matisse Thybulle and Furkan Korkmaz and a first-round pick and give us a starting power forward in Jay Crowder? He could probably play some 3, probably start at 3 for us. What do you think?
I don't know what I think of this. I don't want Korkmaz if I'm them. I am definitely tempted to.
They just traded for Landry Shamet, who, like, he's like the same kind of player as Furkan Korkmaz to be.
For sure. I am very tempted to acquire Thibault because I know I'm going to need maybe 12 minutes a game, or I can just put him on Luka in a huge game and stuff like that.
They do have Mikal Bridges, though. Like, who's like a better defender than Thibault, like
100%.
In those situations. Yeah.
But giving him a chance to take a break at some point in the game, or deploy him as a help defender, or leave him on Luka and let Matisse try to do his thing.
Yeah.
It's very tempting for sure, but not Crowder tempting.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's worth the price for me here. Even if I am onboarding Collins, I still like the veteran of leadership and shooting that he provides, really.
And Crowder can also come off the bench too. Like, if you got John Collins
for sure
and he needed to start, like, it doesn't hurt to bring Jay Crowder and Cam Johnson off the bench as shooters. Like,
all kinds of 5-out opportunities in my backup lineups that I can do. And a coach like Monty Williams does know to do small ball and 5-out, unlike the Sixers.
Yeah. So this is, I'd probably give this like a 4 out of 10 on the realistic scale, but I would absolutely do it if we could get Jay Crowder. I think that he would be kind of the perfect guy that we need. All right.
You wouldn't worry about dogs anymore, I'll tell you that.
That's right. So, okay, we're getting down to our last few trades here. This is a trade that was kind of brought up by Mike O'Connor. Mike O'Connor, I believe, had Danny Green as salary filler here, but I think the Grizzlies would want to get multiple young guys because they're just basically always rebuilding as a small market franchise, trying to get guys on rookie deals, trying to get reset whatever their timeline. They have DeAnthony Melton right now, who they already have Dylan Brooks, who gets a lot of on-ball opportunities, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Like, they have plenty of guys, and Melton became more of a spot-up shooter this year and actually was very good at it. but he is going into the last year of his contract. So this would be the Sixers get DeAnthony Melton. The Grizzlies get 3 players. So this is probably unrealistic just from a roster crunch standpoint. I forgot to include John Conchar in this trade, but we could get him just to make the roster spots work a little bit more even. But the Grizzlies get Matisse Thybulle, Isaiah Joe, and Jaden Springer, and our first-round pick for DeAnthony Melton. I don't think that either team would do this, actually, now that I think about it, because I like DeAnthony Melton a lot. He would be a perfect third guard kind of bench guy that come off the bench and play with both Maxey and Harden. Like, I think that I'd like that a lot, but I just don't think the Sixers can give up 2, possibly 3 wing. Like, I mean, Springer isn't really a wing and Joe isn't really a wing, but like they both can kind of play as wings, and Thybulle is a wing. I don't think a wing desperate team like the Sixers can give up that and their first round pick for guard. But I do like DeAnthony Melton. I would try to figure out a way to get him on the Sixers if possible.
Yeah, I think that the price from the Sixers perspective is a bit steep for a guy who you're not sure if he can play alongside both Maxey and Harden at the same time. That would be a very small.
He shot like 38% on like 6 threes a game or 7 threes per 100 possessions this year. Like he's actually pretty good at shooting threes now. So
he's pretty good at shooting threes.
But he's a point guard. Like, I mean, like,
yeah. Was it Marty who wondered if he was the guy that Darryl was talking about on the pod where he's like, we almost offered 2 picks just to see, and they said no.
Right.
And he was like, was that Melton? I wondered if that was Melton myself at one
Maybe.
point. Because didn't Houston draft him?
Houston drafted him, but they traded him to Phoenix on draft night. So who knows if they really wanted him or if they were just drafting for Phoenix.
Memphis, I believe they hired Jackson Hoyusere for the step-in, and then they wound up with like Melton, Clark, one other guy Jaren Jackson and Bane, all guys who
all draft Twitter guys
so high.
Yep.
Yes. So clearly they're like reading the same intel that we are.
Well, also they were high on Springer in the draft, but they took Zaire Williams over him, and Springer ended up like they were going to take Springer at 18 when they had the 18th pick, and then they moved up to get Zaire Williams. That's why I included Springer in this trade, because this is the only trade I think that he might have potential value. Most of the rebuilding teams, not that Memphis is rebuilding, most of like the Houstons, the OKCs, they already passed on Springer multiple times in the draft last year, and I don't think he's shown enough to have value in a trade since then. So I'd rather just keep Springer unless you can figure out a trade like this where you're getting back like a good player for him.
Yeah, I'm happy to trade Springer. I'm happy to trade this pick. I'm happy to trade Matisse. I don't know that you can pencil in Melton to provide gravity at this point. You know, you might get a certain percentage on a certain number of attempts, but our defense is worried about it. Like Minnesota wasn't. Golden State didn't seem to go out and play very closely.
But also defensively, Melton's very good. Like you're getting him as point of attack defender. Like he's really good. And like, I don't think this trade's super realistic, but I would like to figure out a way to get a guy like DeAnthony Melton, but who knows? He might have another good year and then just get paid. And like, I think it says he has 2 years left. I think he only has 1 year left on that deal, though. I'm pretty sure he only has 1 year left on his contract. And like, I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't want to end up being the team that has to pay him if he's not like your starting point guard or whatever. All right, so
I like him though. I would definitely call about him. Yep.
All right, I believe this is the last trade before we get out of here. This is another one involving Danny Green. It's hard to get to that $18 million number without using Danny Green, but this is a situation. I sent this to Bryant West, who I know from Twitter, who's a Kings fan, and he said he sent it to multiple Kings fans who said they would do it. So this is one of the more realistic ones if the Kings were to draft Keegan Murray at 4. So if the Kings take Keegan Murray at 4, they don't go for Jaden Ivey, or maybe Jabari Smith falls to them and they just take Jabari Smith. If the Kings take Keegan Murray at 4, they might say, all right, he's our power forward of the future. We're going to move on from Harrison Barnes, who has 1 year left on his deal. And so the Sixers get Harrison Barnes. The Kings get Danny Green, Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, and a first-round pick. Korkmaz and Danny are really just for salary purposes here. Danny, once again, wave and stretch. You can keep him. You can do whatever you would like with him, whatever. And they get the Sixers first at 23. They bring in another rookie. I know that they would like Thybulle for sure, because Thybulle is always really fucking good against the Kings. He puts De'Aaron Fox in hell. They're going to need defenders, and like Barnes has not really played defense as well as he used to since he got the last 2 years in Sacramento. That's probably an effort thing because he doesn't give a shit. And you have Thibault, who defensively you could put around Fox and Sabonis. Now, shooting-wise, that creates an issue because you need shooting around those two because they don't shoot threes. So that could be an issue, and Barnes does shoot threes. But for the Sixers, my thought here is you get Harrison Barnes. You start Harrison Barnes at the 3. You have Tobias Harris, who's obviously redundant. They're very similar players. But you put Harrison Barnes at the 3. You have Tobias Harris at the 4. And then when Tobias is expiring, you can move him. You can extend Harrison Barnes, and you could put Barnes at the 4, and then you could figure out other trades for Tobias where you get back guards or wings or whatever else.
I think this rates out pretty high for the ones we've looked at. I think this is close to. I think both sides could say yes here.
Yeah, I think this is
maybe the closest one.
7 out of 10 on a realistic scale. I think the only way that this doesn't happen, this kind of trade doesn't happen, is if the Kings are like, look, we're in win now mode. Barnes is a good player. We want to keep Barnes. That's fine. Whatever. The Kings are stupid because the Kings they're not making the play-in no matter who they draft. It doesn't matter. They're the Kings. Like, they're not building around Fox
not
and
even
Sabonis. No, they're not. The West is too good. And the West is good and deep, and the Kings don't. Fox and Sabonis is not good enough to get you to get you 35 to 40 wins in the West. It's just not. And like you're gonna have to construct everything around those two's weaknesses, which are they're not great defenders and they're not great shooters. So like, how are you gonna build around those guys? You have to have everyone good at defense and shooting around them. And then even then, in the most optimized version of that, like I still see that topping out as like maybe the 10 seed. I don't buy what Sacramento's doing at all. But my whole point on this is that I think it might be realistic only, or it might not be realistic only if the Kings are like, we're in win now mode, whatever. But if they draft Keegan Murray, then you have multiple starting power forwards, and like the Sixers might be like Barnes did play small forward at least some this year. He's 47% he played his minutes at small forward. It was like 50-something% at power forward. Like I think he could be a capable small forward for the Sixers. Maybe the Kings view it the same way. They just keep him. They don't have a lot of forwards, but I put this on a realistic scale, 7 to 10. The Kings get a lot of young guys back, some assets. They don't get guys to stay there, and they'd be able to extend Matisse. So I don't know. It's possible. This is a possible one. Once again, I think all of these are kind of a little bit out of the realm of possibility, but the Sixers don't really have a lot to work with. That's the problem with all this. Is the Sixers only have like 3 or 4 assets on the whole team.
Definitely could see something with Matisse in Chicago.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see something like this one right here. I would put those as high compared to the others. I liked the one involving Washington to Hornets, but I wonder if that's just me dreaming.
We're just like, please give us
PJ
Washington.
Get a guy we need.
Yes.
And
please.
He's young.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it hits all the boxes. He's old enough that Doc will play him, but he's young enough that he still has upside.
And he might bridge this like weird divide where
yes.
Daryl suggests we shoot threes and play small when Joel sits, and Doc just needs his like antiquated dinosaur out there at all times.
And I think he could play with Paul Reed too, because Paul Reed is not a shooter, but you could put PJ or him at the 5. And the other one at the other position.
Yeah, I like that a lot. What about JaMychal Green now that he's probably more available from OKC in a smaller deal?
So I've thought about him. The only reason I would
about him and Williams at once.
Williams, Kendrick?
Yeah.
So like you trade them Danny. Danny goes back to OKC where he never played. You trade him like Danny, Isaiah Joe, and the 23rd pick for Kendrick Williams and JaMychal Green.
Something like that.
Yeah, so that's like, yeah, I mean, that works salary-wise, and like, I mean, I'd consider it. I think you're starting to get to the point where like you have too many similar. Like, my biggest problem with getting JaMychal Green is like Paul Reed will never play next year if we get
Right.
JaMychal Green. Like Doc coached JaMychal Green in LA. He knows he's a veteran. JaMychal Green was not good this year. And
Well, he was good against us in the final moments of that game against Denver.
Doesn't matter.
That leaves a lasting imprint on Doc.
Exactly. So if they get JaMychal Green, like let's say like there's a salary, maybe it's you get JaMychal Green and we get Danny's expiring, and then they can waive that, whatever. They can just eat that, and then they get something from us. I don't know what it is.
The most valuable thing about Green would be if he were on an $8 million contract, and then you could trade him later.
But like the Sixers are probably going to be in the tax.
Yeah.
And when this was brought up to them before, it was basically like, I'm not going to pay some guy. Like, I'm not going to go into the tax for a guy who's not a starter.
Right. That's fair.
And like JaMychal Green, like he's good. He's not great. He's a rotation player. He's once again a seventh man. Like, and if we're trying to acquire starters, it's going to be a little bit difficult to like sell that. Like, I'd rather just move on from Danny, try to develop Paul Reed. If you can't get something back for Danny in a trade, then try to attach the pick to Matisse or use the pick. Like, try to get as many cracks at getting a starter as you can. Don't trade assets for seventh men, for eighth men, for ninth men. You can find those guys in free agency. You can find those guys off the scrap heap. You can get them as throw-ins in trades. Like, you don't like the Sixers need to be better on the margins, but they need to not use everything that they have to get these guys that are deeper in the roster, is my point.
Yeah, and I don't mind them just using this pick if a guy kind of falls. Just keep the player.
If Tari Eason falls, this conversation's over. Tari Eason is a Sixer, and they have another guy that even if he can't help them right away, it would have some trade value if he shows up. Like, people would trade a lot for Jonathan Kuminga, I bet, and that guy isn't even good. Like, he's shown flashes, sure, but he's not a good NBA player. He can't play in the playoffs. And like, I bet you teams would be very interested if Jonathan Kuminga became available.
Who was the worst player they could have got where they would just win the title for sure with these young guys they had, like Weissman, Moody, Kuminga, all traded at once on Christmas Day? Who's the worst player where like this title is a wrap?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think they needed to trade all of their young guys. I think they just needed to trade like one of them.
Yeah, that was costly.
Like, but the thing is, like, Wiseman has no value. Wiseman's never been good. That's the big thing, is like, he wasn't a great prospect. The Warriors hyped him up to be this great prospect. Most people didn't even have him top 5. Like, he was like a 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. Like, he was like a project and like didn't play college ball, whatever. So like, his trade value was not going to be good. But like, they had 7 and 14, and they got Kuminga and Moody, who I think are good picks in retrospect. Like, I think everyone would agree that they're pretty good picks. Like, I would probably just play Moody more. I think that he's good enough to just play. But I also like Moody as a prospect a lot. But I'm trying to think, like, because they need a backup center, right? Like, that's like been like their main thing. It's like, they really like, they don't have a backup big. They don't have like options, whatever. But it is hard to like say like, okay, like if they got Daniel Tice, well, Daniel Tice isn't playable in this series. Like, he's barely played. But like, that's a guy that they could have got at the deadline. You know what I mean? Like Josh Richardson, like the guys that were moved at the deadline. Like, honestly, Derek White was the best player that wasn't a star that would have made sense for a team like the Warriors. Like, there you go. Like, Derek White.
There you go. That's the one.
If they get him instead of Boston might not even be here. And then the Warriors win the title, no question. With
excellent
Derek White is like your third guard coming off the bench. So,
all right, let me ask you one quick thermometer question before we.
All right, let's get it.
23. You have 23, and you see that Tari Eason is still available to the Bulls at 18. The Bulls call you and say, "This pick is yours. Give us Thibault to swap."
So it's just Thibault for 18.
Matisse Thybulle costs you simply 5 spots to move up.
Oh, no, I'm not doing that.
Okay.
I'm low on Thibault, but I'm not 5 spots in the draft.
Just wanted to check to see how low you are.
Yeah, no. I look, other teams are going to value him more than that. Like,
What's the most you would pay then to do that, to go up 18?
I mean, do they like Isaiah Joe or like one of our younger, like, I'd give up maybe someone that is, or like some seconds, but like to move up 5 spots. And the difference between the 18th, the guy that you can get with the 18th pick in the draft and the 23rd pick in the draft is not all that different, historically speaking. Trading
Just
up
wondering if weaving it into that deal you proposed could do something for each team.
I think it's possible. Like, I think that they would try to just say, give us 18 for Thibault, and the Bulls would probably say no.
Yeah.
But I do think that, if you can, like moving up in the draft, historically speaking, unless it's a Luka situation where you're moving up for the guy, like you're like, all right, we know who we want. He's our dude. We're getting him, which, by the way, doesn't really happen much anymore. When was the last time someone traded up into the top 5 in the draft?
Luka. 5.
I literally think Luka was the last guy.
Yeah.
Teams don't trade out of the top 5 now because they're horrified to miss on a superstar. So my whole point with this is that moving up in the draft, generally speaking, like the Sixers could have jumped up to try to get Tyrese Maxey, but he fell to them. It's a risk sitting back, whatever. But like, generally speaking, if guys are like, you're probably going to have a guy at 18 and 23 that are in the same tier of player to you and prospect to you. And like, the difference between getting the guy who goes at 18 and 23, historically speaking, is not that different. So like, I would say just stick at 23, hope that he falls to 23, and if he doesn't, take one of the other prospects that you like.
I like it.
All right. It was great talking with you. Almost 2 hours. Fantastic slop session here.
Thank you to the slop guzzlers who listened in.
Whoa. All right. That one might be a little X-rated, but all right. All right. Dave, thanks so much for coming back on. I appreciate it. Always enjoy talking slop with you, and I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Always. Peace. Thank you.